welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we are devoted to conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. It's Tuesday, December 17th, and I'm Abby Marshall, a reporter and producer for IdeaStream Public Media and WKSU, and a certified Lake Erie enthusiast, and I will be moderating today's conversation. We are at the Happy Dog in Gordon Square for our Happy Dog Takes on Everything series, and tonight we are taking on downtown Cleveland's lakefront. The future of our downtown lakefront has always been a topic of conversation. In fact, studies as early as 1903 hoped to find solutions that enhanced our North Shore. Over the decades, connectivity, access, as well as the challenge of Burke Lakefront Airport all have remained top concerns. Now, the decision by Haslam Sports Group to move the Cleveland Browns to the western suburbs has raised questions about the move's impact on the city's much anticipated Lakefront Master Plan, local businesses, tourism, and more. Today, we will be discussing what opportunities have opened up and what are the challenges that lie ahead as we envision a lakefront for all. Joining me on stage as we discuss this and more is Drew Crawford, the Senior Director of Planning of Downtown Cleveland, Inc., Jessica Trivosanno, Senior Advisor for Major Projects at the City of Cleveland, and Scott Skinner, the Executive Director of the North Coast Waterfront Development Corporation. Thank you for joining us. So let's kick this off. I know that we've talked about the history of the lakefront in past conversations and forums, and we want to be very forward-focused and forward-thinking, but let's touch briefly on why we are here where we're at right now in this moment. There have been decades of conversations about lakefront development, lots of scrapped lakefront development plans. So perhaps, Jessica, you can speak to what is different this time, why this is such a priority for the mayor, and how we actually get this thing to the finish line.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, so I think that what feels so special about the lakefront this time around, and I was going back through my lakefront and was reminded that this is our 17th lakefront, with the idea of planning for the future of the land. But I think there's a couple of things that make this feel really different and really exciting. One is that we were really focused on community first, so making sure that we were really intentional about hearing from people all around Cleveland about what would make the lakefront feel like theirs, our downtown lakefront feel like theirs. So that was the foundation, and it's been a really strong foundation for us to build the rest on. We have really important alignment from the county throughout the city administration on how important this role is. And so that's, another big piece. We have Scott Organization that I'm sure he'll talk about, which is a new nonprofit that was formed to really see our lakefront vision through different administrations, through changing times. We now have a nonprofit whose sole goal is this initiative. And we have some federal cash. We have $60 million in the bank that we are excited to use to implement to make this thing real. So between all of that, I think this makes this a much different experience for the lakefront and a different conversation than what we had before.
Can I just one or two things, Justin? So that's all correct and very, very true. I think that the two things that I would add are, one, from the start of this, this is the 17th version of the Lakefront Master Plan, but one of the big differences, in addition to community feedback, was the focus on something that is executable, right? And the focus on moving it from beyond just plans on paper to something that we can actually get shovels in the ground to build. And then the second, and Jessica talked about putting all these pieces in play and getting all these pieces together to actually be able to execute. A big part of that is the downtown TIF district, which you can speak about more than I can. But when we are looking for these federal funds, local match is a critical piece of that. And we talk about really significant infrastructure needs that are difficult to finance through traditional real estate transactions. That downtown TIF district is a hugely important piece and can't be understated.
And TIF stands for tax increment financing.
I was hoping we could warm up to
Yes, I was going to say, we will touch on that later. But just for those wondering, it is like an economic development tool that we can get into a little bit later.
Right.
Yes.
I like it.
So Scott, a key part of this development is your organization. So can you talk a little bit about its inception and identify some of the key projects that are executable, as you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So the North Coast Waterfront Development Corporation is an independent nonprofit that was started by the city and works closely with the city, but is a standalone entity whose sole focus is figuring out how to execute on developing our downtown lakefront. a lot of folks in the city do amazing work, but people like Jessica have 47,000 different things that they're working on at any one time. My organization's sole focus is the lakefront and figuring out how to execute on that vision. So that's one piece. My board is made up of both executives around the city and major lakefront stakeholders to ensure buy-in there. And then in terms of what we're doing, we're working closely with the city on all of this. We're talking to development partners about how to execute on the master plan that Joyce over there spent a lot of time putting together as well. We are trying to figure out how to finance what will be a fantastic waterfront public park. We are applying for federal grants. Jessica mentioned 60 million confirmed. We have a number of applications in and are hoping to get a lot more dollars here soon. We are working on advancing the design work of the shoreway and the land bridge that we've all been trying to achieve for so long. And then we're doing some stuff in the near term. One of the things that I'm really excited about, all the stuff that we're talking about today is years out, right? Infrastructure work takes a long time. These projects are really complicated, and we're looking at a couple years before you're going to see shovels in the ground. But the land north of the stadium is 25-acre surface parking lot used 11 days a year that is owned by the city of Cleveland, that is public land, and we don't want to wait to give folks access to that space until we're ready to build something. So as soon as next spring and summer, you'll also see what we're calling near-term or temporary activation. So walking trails, pop-up food and beverage opportunities, sports courts, skate parks, things to get folks out there on a regular basis just to experience the water and to create a sense of place while we're waiting for all of this other stuff to come.
So you brought it up, but we have to talk about it. It's top of mind for a lot of folks, and I know I've done a lot of reporting on it. You all have done a lot of work on it. But
what are you talking about?
The Cleveland Browns. Let's address that and their decision to move the stadium to Burke Park. It's a $2.4 billion dome stadium, which will essentially vacate what is the city-owned stadium and a lot of that lakefront property. So, Drew, let's actually start with you and talk about the economic impact on downtown Cleveland. It's often cited as a major concern in regard to the Browns move. The city estimates about a $30 million loss to downtown Cleveland in annual economic activity. The Browns economic study says it'll be a $1 billion boon to the regional economy. But can you talk a little bit about strengthening the downtown core and the vision with the lakefront and how that might be affected by this stadium decision?
Yeah, absolutely. Figured we would probably talk about this evening, given the hot topic that it is. And from our perspective at Downtown Cleveland Incorporated, we don't want them to move. I hope I'm not in a minority of thinking that, but the economic impact can't be overstated. So aside from the small business owners that I've spoken with, and when they announced that they might be leaving downtown, they're really, really concerned because they do, like a lot of places downtown, their revenue, the vast majority of the revenue comes from event-based activities, event-based openings. So they do have a lot of their operating costs during events. Huntington Bank Field is the fourth most visited event center venue in downtown Cleveland. Last year alone, there were 1.4 million unique visits to the stadium. So we are losing that economic impact, that economic power if the Browns do move. And we are, certainly concerned about that. I'll also say that we think we are pretty unique, although there are cities like us, but to have 3 professional sports teams in downtown Cleveland in a very walkable downtown, and sometimes it's cold and sometimes it's not, but that is a differentiator. And that is why a lot of people enjoy watching sports in Cleveland live. That's why there's certainly conferences that come downtown. There's other events, but that walkability is big.
Mm-hmm. And I know that the city's position and Cuyahoga County is to try to keep the Browns in downtown Cleveland. But Scott, you mentioned that is a big piece of real estate, and I know Mayor Justin Bibb has also said we're going to proceed with the plan with or without the Browns. So let's talk about the opportunity there if that real estate were to open up in the future.
Sure. So if you include the Browns Stadium, you're talking about 50 acres of waterfront land, which is a pretty transformational opportunity. And I think the city spent 18 months putting together a vision for the lakefront that includes a stadium and that is an executable vision. And if the Browns ultimately decide they want to be a part of that vision, I think that's great. And that's fantastic. And we have a plan that we can move forward with for them. However, to your point, they've made it very clear what their intentions are. And I think it would be irresponsible not to start planning for life on the lakefront without a stadium. Those efforts have started, and we're approaching it through the same lens that we approached planning for the lakefront with the stadium. Well, I'm not going to talk about what specific uses can be. We're thinking about sort of the three, what I think of as core pillars of the initial master plan. And that's what a master plan is, right? It's not a dictating document. It's a set of values and a set of principles. And one of those is access to public space. Right now, almost every activity, except for Voinovich Park, which is very well run, Drew, every activity is fairly expensive. Having world-class free public park space that is open and accessible to all Clevelanders is a fundamental part of that plan. That doesn't change with or without a stadium. The second is a driver of economic development, right? That's part of what the stadium is. It drives economic development of the region. While we're never going to replace 65,000 people going down there 10 or 11 days a year, how do we fundamentally change what that looks like? How do we bring 6,500 people down there a couple hundred days a year? So we're looking at what the lakefront can look like through a market-based lens as well, talking to development partners, understanding what anchor uses there could be. There's a gap in the current Cleveland market for, and doing a lot of that sort of market-based work. And then the third key principle there is activation, right? One of the biggest challenges of the site is, as it currently stands, it's only activated 11 or 12 days a year. If the Browns were to stay, their plans do involve activating that space on a much regular basis. If they're not, then leaving creates a lot of challenges, but activating that space on a regular basis is one of the really interesting and exciting opportunities. We are developing our downtown lakefront right now, regardless of there being a stadium, and the core ideas, the core values that we spent the last 2 years, including folks here on the stage talking about, are really not changing.
I think one thing I want to make sure everybody in this room and anybody else listening gets a real idea of is just how transformational the plans that we have for the North Coast Connector are to the access to the lakefront where the Brown Stadium currently is, and kind of what that land is going to look and feel like once this project is done. I mean, right now, if you're thinking about downtown, you can think of yourself in Public Square or on Mall C. You can kind of look, from Public Square, go down Mall C, get to where the convention center is, and then there's a 65-foot bluff, and you can see the lake, and you can't get to it. You have to then go right or left on Lakeside, and then go up 3rd or 9th, where cars are whizzing past you to get on or off the highway, and you're nervous the entire time, you're not sure if you're gonna make it. Once you finally get through 9th or 3rd, you then have this huge trek to make to get to the lake, which is then, a parking lot essentially, where right north of the lakefront, or where the stadium is. What we're looking at in the future is this beautiful land bridge that is essentially a sweeping park that will connect from the Huntington Convention Center, Mall C, to the lake, to this publicly accessible space with over 12 acres of public park. And then whatever uses are surrounding there are going to be so well loved and so well used that, to me, it's a real shame that the Browns don't want to be part of that, because I don't see who wouldn't. But no matter what is there, I think the whole experience of getting to the lakefront is going to be something that we look back on and think like, how is this not here before? What do you mean it wasn't a 3-minute walk from downtown to the lakefront? That's really
Can I have really quick?
where we're gonna be.
Yes, then we'll wrap up the Browns conversation.
And I just want to add to, as an urban planner, what Jessica just described, it's fun giving directions. Oh, you just go a left and a right and a left and don't get hit. So designing a city for people and not for cars is a thing that, our organization is trying to do. Cars will always be there, but we have some of the widest roads in the entire United States. Our city was built for a population more than double the size of where we're at now. So we have the room for people. We have too much room for cars. So that type of design and social infrastructure is something that we're really excited about, no matter what happens with the Browns.
So while we are talking about things that may or may not be along the lakefront, let's talk about Burke Lakefront Airport. It's an airport taking up miles of what is often referred to as prime lakefront real estate downtown. The mayor has previously expressed his support for potentially closing that airport, similar to what we saw happen in another lakefront city of Chicago, although that was much more dramatic, an overnight decision by the mayor to bulldoze X's in the runways to render it useless. And they have since opened up a park and green space there. So Jessica, can you speak about the purpose of that airport, who it mostly serves, and also the two economic impact studies that were released by the city earlier this year on what would happen if that airport were to close?
Sure. So Burke Lakefront Airport is over 450 acres of land right on our lakefront, just a little bit east of the lakefront that we've been talking about for the most part this evening. It is primarily a private airport, so not a lot of commercial flights go in and out. The city, as you said, Abby, Mayor Justin Bibb has not been shy about his desire to see something else happen with that piece of property, but not wanting to do anything hastily or not, wanting to make sure we really understood. The city commissioned 2 studies that are publicly available that you're welcome to peruse. They're very lengthy, but they kind of go over 2 different things. One is the sort of process. What does it take to close an airport like this? And the other is what would the economic impact be of closing the airport? What that study found was that Burke is responsible for about $76 million in economic impact. And if it was to close, 67 million of that would stay in the region. It would go to Hopkins, it would go to the county airport, it would stay in the region, and it would open up quite a few other opportunities for what else we could do with that 450 acres of land.
So kind of talking about that, one of the main things that would have to go away, there's not another venue when I've spoken to the organizers, is the air show. So I don't know, Drew, if you can talk about that, because that is something that brings a lot of visitors to downtown Cleveland and a lot of people that might not be visiting the urban core otherwise.
It does. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it definitely brings visitors to downtown. But, we want to be good partners and we want to be open to whatever may come of that. And if it is shutting down the airport, I think there's compromise that can be made. I can't imagine maybe it could go to Hopkins, probably not. But I think there's creative solutions that we can find. I think there's a way.
I would just add in that it's really easy to say we're shutting down Burke or we want to shut down Burke. What happens after will be the next really big challenging part. 450 plus acres of land. My background is in real estate development. That is an enormous amount of land that frankly, not just the city of Cleveland, but the region does not necessarily have the market to absorb that much land of really anything. So being thoughtful about how that is developed over time is going to be a really important piece of this. As we're thinking about our lakefront, it's a 20-year project, not a 5-year project, as we're planning out this entire space. But one of the reasons why Burke is such an important piece of this and why we are looking at this is that when you think about Burke with the downtown lakefront where the Brown Stadium currently is, and you think about our lakefront regionally, you go west to Edgewater, you go east to the Metro Parks Cheers project, and then to Euclid Beach, the downtown lakefront and Burke specifically sort of become the centerpiece of this really fantastic experience that can both benefit folks who live here and draw people from all over the country.
Mm-hmm. We're done talking about things that might not be there. Let's move to things that will be there. So we've talked between the 4 of us about how this will help Cleveland market itself as a true waterfront city and as a tourism destination. Jessica, can you kind of tie this into the riverfront development that's happening at Bedrock with the Cavs training facility, the parks, the retail, the residential, all that stuff that's going in and how that all connects?
Of course. So this is what I think about day in, day out is the mayor's shore to core to shore vision. Say that 5 times fast. It is this idea of how do we kind of support a really healthy downtown and therefore our really healthy neighborhoods surrounding our downtown. Having a healthy core keeps our economic base healthy, make sure that we have the taxes that we need to then provide really excellent city services throughout our neighborhoods. So thinking about strategies to really improve and leverage some under-leveraged assets right now, the mayor has really focused on 2 areas. One is the lakefront, so that's what we're talking about mostly. But there's also a really incredible opportunity with our Cuyahoga River. So we are working closely with Bedrock, a real estate developer based primarily in Detroit, to reimagine about 38 acres behind Tower City. I can't give you cardinal directions because it's this winding Cuyahoga River. But behind Tower City, to have what will ultimately be a $3.5 billion development project, starting with the Cavs Clinic facility, which is a world-class training facility. The Cavs have continued to invest in Cleveland and are bringing their facility from Independence back to downtown Cleveland as really an anchor. That's right, I like that. As an anchor for this new development, and along with that, there will be about 12 acres of public park space associated with the development. So new residential, new retail, the reimagination of Tower City, and rethinking that retail experience and how we tie all of that into our riverfront. And then as we think about the shore, one shore is the riverfront. We go through the core up to the lakefront. So making sure that we have really clear connections from the riverfront to our lakefront and a healthy core in between, which Drew can talk way more than I can about all of the importance of that healthy core.
Yeah, Drew, if you can talk about how bringing tourism to Cleveland, or even just bringing people downtown that might live locally in Cleveland for the purpose of visiting the lakefront or the riverfront, bolsters the economic health of the urban core.
Yeah, so a few things, hard to know where to start on that, but yes, it is a driver of visitors. Downtown Cleveland, not only sports, but our cultural institutions like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, like the Science Center, like Playhouse Square, brings so many visitors to the area. We conducted a retail study that wrapped up about a year ago, and the biggest issue was that people don't necessarily stay. We want them to stay. We don't want to trap them there, but we want them to stay, to have a drink, to have dinner, to come early. And that's something that we're working on as an organization. 70% of the buying power and kind of the money spent in downtown Cleveland comes from outside of this county. So a lot of people are already coming into downtown Cleveland to spend money and come for events and take advantage of all the awesome things happening there now. But imagine if there was even more of that, and having such an awesome lakefront, having that riverfront, all of the things that Bedrock is doing, that the city is helping to make happen and liaise with that. We're very excited about that.
Great. Well, I think that we are sufficiently warmed up and the time has come to talk about TIF and financing. But tax increment financing, which is an economic development tool that uses property tax increases, captures that, pours it back into projects. Jessica, can you talk about the new downtown shore TIF district and how that will help finance this project, where the rest of the financing is coming from? Taxpayers, if they're worried, should they be worried about where this money's coming from?
Absolutely. So I think you gave a really good high level of tax increment financing. So tax increment financing is not new to Cleveland. There have been plenty of individual projects that have used tax increment financing, but always on a project by project basis. So if you imagine, an empty lot, maybe a surface parking lot, there's a base level of taxes that empty lot pays. Once you start building on top of that lot, there's building improvements, and those have additional value. What tax increment financing does is capture that additional value and usually lets a developer put it back into the project. That's how it typically works. What's really different about our shore-to-shore TIF district, tax increment financing district, is it covers most of our downtown, so it's not on a project-by-project basis. And it allows the city to capture that incremental property tax increase, put it in sort of a separate fund, and allows us to spend that money only on public infrastructure. So not on, developer financing, but on the parks, the roads, the lighting, all of the public infrastructure that we need to make these really transformational projects happen. So as Scott was saying, one of the things that's so different about this iteration of a lakefront plan is we have a really strong tool in place that will allow us to pay for these big infrastructure investments that we have seen in other cities incentivizes private investment. People want to invest where they're seeing new roads and new infrastructure and new public parks. We see that in Edgewater in this neighborhood, right? All of the development that's kind of come up around there. So that's how the tool works. Your question is, should people be nervous? I would say no. We have been really intentional about how we're deploying a tax increment financing district. As I mentioned, it's specifically for public improvements. It doesn't have any impact on the taxes that are already going to all of your favorite public entities. It doesn't have any effect on the schools, kind of going forward. But it is a really important mechanism for us to be able to finance these really big transformational projects. And it's a tool that's been in place in a lot of other cities. So at least when I go to somewhere like Cincinnati, I'm like, how did they do this? How do they have this riverfront? How are they 20 years ahead of us? It's because they put this tool in 20 years ago. And so that's how they're 20 years ahead of us. So it's something that I think is so nerdy and so like in the weeds, but is one of those policy changes that our government has really committed to make sure that we're going to be able to support this economic development going forward.
I'm glad you gave Cincinnati a shout out. That's where I'm from. And every time I go back, I have to go to the Riverfront Park, which is just gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous.
My
So-
husband, I cried when I went the first time. I was like, how did
It's
they do this? I love
it. Yeah, I'm excited to see what Cleveland does, and hopefully it's something similar or better.
I like that.
So kind of wrapping up before we go to audience questions, can we get some sort of timeline? I know that some of these projects we're talking about are very ambitious and they're all going to kind of be operating on different timelines, but just giving people when to expect some of these changes.
Sure. So there's a couple of things there. There's a bunch of different components of the project. You know, I talked earlier about some of the near-term stuff, activating that space north of the stadium that you'll see as soon as May of this year. So there'll be reason to go down to the downtown waterfront, reason to experience it there. In terms of some of that core infrastructure work, the changes to the shoreway, the money that we hope to secure to finance the land bridge, the grants that we're looking for from the US federal government will require us to start by a certain date. And that means that we would be shovels in the ground in early 2027. And that will be a requirement of the financing that we're securing. So we're talking about 3 years away. That's 2 years away. That's coming up pretty soon, which is really exciting. In terms of development for that land, the Browns lease ends at the end of the 2028 football season. And we're already actively talking to potential development partners, starting to advance design of public space as a key part of that, with the goal of being able to essentially go vertical as soon as that lease expires.
Great. All right. Well, we are about to begin our audience Q&A. For our live stream audience or those who trickled in throughout the forum, those just joining us here, I'm Abby Marshall, a reporter and producer for Idea Stream Public Media, and joining us on stage is Drew Crawford, the Senior Director of Planning of Downtown Cleveland, Inc., Jessica Trivosanno, the Senior Advisor for Major Projects at the City of Cleveland, and Scott Skinner, the Executive Director of the North Coast Waterfront Development Corporation. So if you are here in person, you can line up to this microphone right here, or you can text in your question virtually, or if you're here and just prefer to text, that number is 330-541-5794, and our City Club staff will work to try to get your questions in. A reminder to keep your questions short, to the point, and a question, so we can get to as many as possible. We can begin.
Hi, thanks for being here tonight. I have a million questions, but I'll stick to one. You mentioned $60 million at the beginning, and I'm wondering how far does that $60 million go, and how much more funding, for any of the projects, because it sounds like there are so many different avenues that could be pursued.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we talk about the North Coast Connector project, we are often talking about an area that goes all the way from West 3rd to East 18th. That is then the project area that we're talking about, and that is an over $400 million project. The way that we're thinking about it is in phases, and kind of starting on the western portion now and moving over to the east. The $60 million grant that we received from the Department of Transportation is for $60 million, but that portion of the project is about $100 million, and that covers the Main Avenue Bridge, so demolishing the Main Avenue Bridge to bring the shoreway to grade at East 3rd, the intersections at East 3rd, doing some work on the port retaining wall, and kind of bringing the shoreway to grade in between West 3rd and East 9th. So that's kind of the first piece that we're going to be biting off. But the more federal funding that we're able to obtain, the faster we're going to continue with those pieces, and we're going to start west and move our way east.
The state of Ohio plays a role in that as well. They've also contributed $20 million to this project, and then there's a number of other federal, both grants and debt sources that we're pursuing as well.
Hello, I wanted to give a bit of context. I do have a question. So I found it very interesting that 70% of the money being spent downtown is from people outside of the county. But I'm also aware that there's an increasing downtown population. Where is the orientation between catering to people who live outside of Cleveland, outside of our immediate area, being factored into this, and also providing resources and support? You talk about activation for the people who live downtown and growing that tax and population base.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and yeah, I'm glad you asked it because this retail study on our website, and all your free time, check it out. I love it. But it talks about what we need to be doing for the downtown residents. And as you probably know, we have surpassed 20,000 residents in downtown Cleveland, which we're so excited about. And that puts us way ahead of downtown Cincinnati and Columbus, so take that.
No competition.
Yeah, exactly. A very healthy competition. So there are very specific, there's actually 15 specific recommendations in this that all play a factor, especially for those quality of life elements for our downtown residents to help attract more residents. So that is, I guess I would say the first thing we're working on is concentrating and not dispersing. There are pockets of retail downtown. We're trying to incorporate more retail in that. We are working with the brokers who have downtown retail space. We're trying to be creative with pop-up spaces and those types of things. So we're working. But I will say too, it's a challenge, as it is in any city. We also have an abundance of vacant retail space. If you were to take away the Galleria, the former Galleria, if you were to take away the arcades, if you were to take away any indoor retail space, you would have just enough retail demand. I really think we've kind of leveled out at the bottom. There's more demand for food and beverage, if you can believe it, and hence 3 really big announcements that came a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I'll add just a couple thoughts there as well. I mean, I think to your question directly of catering to folks living downtown versus folks coming in from outside, I think the answer is we have to do both, right? Almost every challenge we face as a city is downstream of the declining tax base. And while we need to figure out how to grow equitably, growth both from people moving here and within here is a really critical piece of that. It's been said a lot, but if we continue to fight over who gets the piece of a shrinking pie, we're going to be in a lot of trouble as a region. And as we think about these transformational projects, we have to think about it through the mindset of moving on from managing decline to moving towards managing that growth. And that means building things and creating places that attract people from outside of the city, but also benefit people who live in the city and live in that downtown.
One last thing to add, which is that the Lakefront Master Plan includes a pretty substantial residential component. Yeah. We want people in downtown to have more neighbors, and so the hope too is that those will be, the new development will be fun places for people to live, and it will be for the entire downtown, but we also want you to have new neighbors.
Thank you.
We can take the next question.
Hello, my name is Joe. If the Browns do in fact move to Brook Park, the way I see it, maybe you see it differently, and if you do, question 1, do you see it differently? I see long-term, we're gonna end up having 2 sort of mega entertainment centers in the region. And if that happens, do you think the region can handle that?
I'll take the easy one, sure. So I think the answer is complicated. To push back on the premise a little bit, if the Browns do end up moving to Brook Park, I don't see it as a death sentence to downtown. I think there are real risks to harming downtown, but I don't necessarily see that. I think we're assuming that everything that is on those proposed plans is actually going to get built. And as we know from the last 16 iterations of the Lakefront Master Plan, that's not necessarily going to be the case, right? I think even if they do execute on components of that plan, building one hotel, while it may harm downtown a little bit, is not going to take away every single potential user of a hotel downtown. As we think about 2 entertainment districts, we're discounting a lot of the assets that we already have downtown that are staying. the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Guardians, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Great Lakes Science Center, everything shore to shore, there's still a huge set of resources there and a huge set of attractions to bring the Browns, to bring them back here. I would add all sports. I'd add in Playhouse Square is the second largest theater district in the country, as a huge attraction as well. So I don't necessarily think that it would take away everything from downtown. I think we can still build a vibrant downtown, even without a stadium and even with a development going on in Brook Park. In terms of, creating a new district, people living there, as a region and as a city, historically, we're just not building a lot. There's still room in the market to build significantly more. My favorite fun fact is in 2021, the city of Cleveland pulled as many building permits as it had in the last couple decades. And if you look at the top 50 MSAs in comparison to them on a per capita basis, we were 47th out of 50 in building permits pulled per capita. So while right where we're sitting, it seems like we're doing all of this stuff and there's a lot of building going up really quickly, as a region, there's just not. And while I think there are real risks to downtown, the Browns move to Brook Park, I think one, there's room for both, and two, I do not at all see it as a death sentence for downtown.
We'd still rather they not.
Correct, yeah, correct.
Co-sign on that too. Yeah, Scott, you make excellent points, and we agree with that. That makes a lot of sense. But just given challenges, pandemic, and a lot of other things, it would be really great if they stayed.
I think my name's David. I've Chicago for 23 years, so this is very iterative, and honestly, just plow X's in it overnight, and done, everything falls into place. But I'm concerned about the traffic flow vision, because I drive that road like multiple times per week, and there's little room for like narrowing in a number of those areas. The third line thing is a mess, but how are you calculating traffic flow, and are we basing it on current traffic flow or what you anticipate is going to happen when we create this fabulous space? Because if you look at Lakeshore Drive through Chicago, it jams up just because of the parks. So if you build something amazing, it's going to be very densely populated down there with cars. So
Did ODOT ask you to ask that question? It is a great question, and part of, behind the curtain of why these projects or projects like this take so much time is because of all of the analysis that goes into doing them, and part of that analysis is traffic studies.
Yeah.
A lot of traffic studies. And so you're right to say that, how will this affect traffic? And it's something that we've looked at really closely. The good news is it won't affect traffic that much. I think we were all pleasantly surprised when we ran the numbers again and again and again, thinking about the ways that you use the shoreway, the ways that 90's use, thinking about what we anticipate to be changes to 90 in the future. ODOT's had a long project around Dead Man's Curve that we anticipate will happen around the same timeline. There's going to be a lot of other ways for people to get around downtown. And even that aside, as I think Drew said, we're really overbuilt. So there's a lot of ways that we're going to be able to have people get through. Good question.
First, my name is William, and not to sandbag any people on the panel, I retired from the Division of Engineering Construction in 2008. I've seen everything from the study to the jet port in the lake, up to working on the utilities, the relocation of Brown Stadium, and the relocation of Riverside. I have two concerns. Number one, land ownership. It is my understanding that everything north of the railroad tracks is filled land, technically belongs to the state of Ohio. And number two, I'm worried about basically Burke Lakefront especially, that is all quote unquote garbage fill. And that was where they had the Cleveland Aquatic exhibition, or whatever you call it, in the late 30s. And it's basically all garbage fill, and the utilities and sewer outlets run under it. It's be a huge cost to do that. And I advise you to look very well at the suitability, the costs of piling foundations for the buildings. So thank you.
We get to talk about submerged land leases and tax increment financing. What a panel!
I know. Thanks for the question. So for anyone who's had more than one drink tonight, I'm about to put you to sleep talking about submerged land leases. So there's a couple things there. One, I think with the current site, right, there's a stadium built on it. It's built to hold 65,000 people. On that downtown lakefront site, it is suitable for a considerable amount of development. To the legal question, the Lake Erie used to start where the shoreway is. So yes, everything north of those railroads used to be Lake Erie. Which means there's a complicated ownership structure that does involve the state of Ohio, and also involves the city of Cleveland. Now, there was an apartment project and some in Voinovich Park 6 or 7 years ago that shows that you can have financeable real estate transactions within these legal structures. We're working really closely with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and with the state of Ohio more broadly to ensure that the BIB administration has been working on this for years, knowing that we want to see development there in the future, to ensure that legally we are able to enter into long-term land leases with potential development partners and actually have legal real estate transactions. The submerged land lease component does make it more complicated, but it is absolutely doable. To the question about Burke, that is also man-made land. Yes, we are, to look at it in a more positive light, we're still acquiring fill on Burke, which means we're probably the only city in North America that is currently amassing more waterfront land on a regular basis. Not all of Burke is going to be very dense development. There's lots that you can do with that kind of land that includes park space, that includes significantly less dense development with wood frame construction that is entirely suitable for the land that is there.
You talked a bit about the legal structure, but Scott's organization in the city we're also doing a lot of work kind of studying utilities, making sure that we have all of our due diligence in place. There's been a lot of work that's happened over the years that I'm sure my previous City of Cleveland colleague was part of, and so we're also working to just compile it all to make sure that we have it all together so that when we do have a development partner, they're ready to move.
Yes.
My name is Cora. I'm 10 years old, and if kids can help, how could they help?
That is a really great question. Thank you so much. So one, I think the most important thing you can do is tell us what you think. Whenever you see online or anything like that, what images of the lakefront could look like, there's a website called northcoastconnector.com. I'm happy to give it to you afterwards, where you can go and you can actually leave comments and replies on the website to tell us what you think about the lakefront plan. In those comments, we actually look at those. We've had over 5,000 of them in the last couple of years, so it's really important to get feedback. On top of that, if you can help us, we're always willing to go to schools and talk about the lakefront and get support, because what we're building is really something that you're going to enjoy in 5, 10, 15 years. We want to make sure it's something that you and all of your friends in your cohort want to do.
And next spring and summer, when there's a bunch of cool activities on the North Coast Yard, tell your parents like every single weekend, that's where you want to go.
I was going to say something similar. Make sure your parents get you to come to downtown Cleveland to come to an event. Maybe not necessarily, it could be free. Hopefully it's free, but perhaps a ticketed event too. But there's a really good playground at the Science Center, and we're trying to build more of those downtown.
Thank you. Yeah, raise up that microphone.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean.
When you take your kids there, bring them to the Happy Dog. So my question is, with all this development, arts and entertainment seem like they will be a key component to it. We're in a music venue now. Music is key to Cleveland, not just Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the orchestra. We did a music census earlier this year that showed that Cleveland has more going on musically than Austin, Texas, and New Orleans. What I want to know is, how do the local operators get a seat at the table for the conversation? Because what we've seen in other places that have done development, like Chicago, deals get cut with Live Nation or AEG, the big multinational operators that take money out of the community. How can we have a seat at the table? How can the local arts community and the local music community have a seat at the table before those decisions are made?
So I can tell you pretty confidently, on the lakefront at least, none of those decisions have been made. And as we're planning for what the lakefront could look like without a stadium or with one, I think the way you have a seat at the table is let's talk about it. We're more than willing to have those conversations. We are very eager to move on building out the lakefront and move quickly on it. And if there are local partners that we can do that with, that is a way better option for us, and a process that we can expedite as well.
but I would echo what you said, Sean, which is that I think thinking about arts, culture, and how to make the lakefront feel like authentically Cleveland. And I think we do that by adding arts and culture and all of these things that make Cleveland magical is really important. And I think it's also up to everybody in this room and listening to hold us accountable to make sure that we are doing that.
Hi, my name is Julia. Yes, I'm a little shorter. There you go. First of all, thank you all for your work on this. I'm really excited about the future development of downtown Lakefront. I moved here from out of state, and part of the draw was access to fresh water and the lake, and I'm really grateful for that. But I'm wondering how the health of the lake is going to be taken into consideration in this planning. The access to public space for people is really exciting, especially green space, as well as development of downtown. But there's been a lot of negative externalities that have unfortunately hurt our lake. And I'm wondering what we're doing to integrate environmental values into future development. And I would love to hear more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I can start. So I'm not an environmental scientist, but what I can tell you is that concept has been top of mind throughout this entire process. You're not the first person that we've heard that feedback from. So we've been doing a lot of this community engagement over the last few years. It's something that we hear consistently from folks in every ward in the city of Cleveland. As we're thinking about building out what will be mostly public space on the downtown lakefront, we're looking at a variety of nature-based solutions and a variety of building methods that encourage that we're thinking about this in an environmentally friendly way moving forward.
I would also maybe just plug the city's climate action plan. We are, as a city, I mean, we're thinking about climate action, climate justice, climate resilience, not just from how do we make this one project climate resilient, but how do we take an all of city approach, an all of government approach. And so we have really talented colleagues in our Department of Sustainability. I think one really tangible thing that we're looking at with the lakefront though is thinking about how we can naturalize some of the borders and really thinking about how do we make sure that we don't have hard edges against Lake Erie, but really have a soft place and a environment that is, feeds off of Lake Erie and is made, hopefully makes the lake healthier.
Would just add there's a couple of organizations and partners. One, saw a friend here tonight from the sewer district who's thinking very, very seriously about the health of the water in our region. It's so important to us. Thinking about the nonprofit Flats Forward, that is a business owner representation, but that is the lifeblood of what happens on the river, and the environmental health of it is really, really, really important. And also Canal Partners too, and their work with Canal Basin Park and a lot of other things.
Hello, my name is Derek, and thank you very much for a great conversation. My question is about TIF financing, and after reading the Wikipedia page for TIFs, it seems like the biggest critique for TIFs is that added value and that foregone tax, I guess, wouldn't end up then going to the city services that it currently goes to. Can you maybe speak on some of that lost tax revenue? If you feel like that there's like a natural kind of development that's coming downtown and that we don't necessarily need that shore to shore, yeah, sorry.
Sure. So I think what you've noted is one of the sort of main critiques of tax increment financing, which is, are we diverting taxes that should or could be benefiting other, whether it's the city or other public agencies. I think the way that we're approaching it, and I think for a really good reason, is if there's no property growth, then there isn't anything to capture. And frankly, where we're at with the city of Cleveland is that we are at a real risk of property values not increasing unless we do something, unless we invest, unless we put the type of public infrastructure in that we know will generate additional investment. And so a couple of things. One, sort of the increment is often pretty small. And two is that the increment, it might not exist, right? Like zero, if there's no property tax increase, then there's nothing that we're diverting, and in fact, the pie could shrink. And so that's really what we're focusing on when we think about tax increment financing in this TIF district is how do we capture what we're seeing right now is, some incremental growth, invest it in public infrastructure, and then how does that public infrastructure then attract additional private investment, which will ultimately, tax increment financing only lasts this TIP is 30 years long. At the end of that 30 years, the city and all the other entities capture all that growth right back.
And I wanted to note, correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica, but I believe all of these TIFs are not school TIFs. So the schools will still
That's right.
receive the funding regardless of that. That is the exemption there.
That's right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very informative. You've mentioned and referenced all sorts of organizations beyond your own organizations that are involved with this, but there's been no mention of Cleveland Metro Parks. And Cleveland Metro Parks has ambitious plans for the lake shore going from east all the way to west and back and forth. I'd just like to know how that fits into your thinking and where they are in your discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. So Cleveland Metro Parks, you're absolutely right, is a phenomenal organization that's done great things and is continuing to do great things. As we think about our lakefront as a region, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, the Cheers project that Metro Parks is undertaking is a really critical piece of that. A lot of us in here are very well informed and come to seminars to talk about the lakefront at Happy Dog at City Club. But when I go to community meetings in different wards in the city, to most people, there's almost no differentiation between the different lakefronts that exist, right? It's just one lakefront for the city. So I think to sort of answer your question, we're thinking about the work that they're doing as complementary to what we're doing as we think about our lakefront as a region. In terms of their involvement specifically, I talk to them on a weekly basis. There's no formal involvement, but as we're thinking about building a public park on our lakefront, there is literally not an organization that I can think of that is more familiar with managing a public park on our lakefront, right? So while there's no formal involvement, they are very much an important stakeholder in this project. They've played roles in working groups for a number of different components of the project, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but their success is our success, and our success is their success as we move forward.
Thank you.
Hi, so I know it's gonna be accessible through the land bridge. I'm curious, is it gonna be accessible by road from the east and the west? And if so, will there be free parking?
Yes.
Asking an important question.
Thank you.
Oh boy.
So, sure.
I'm formulated.
I'm just gonna. So yes, it will be accessible from all directions. West 3rd and East 9th are still north-south connections to get to the lakefront, and they will continue to be very important north-south connections to get to the lakefront. I think the land bridge is amazing. We need to do it, but the connection at East 9th, as you go down the lakefront, is probably just as, if not more important, from how many people are actually going to use it on a regular basis. West 3rd will be that as well. In addition, as we think about bringing the shoreway down to grade and turning it into something that fits into the city grid and looks more like a city boulevard, there will be additional signalized intersections along that street.
So are those roads south of the railroad tracks?
Those are north of the railroad tracks.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah,
Just making sure.
Yep, I gotcha. In terms of if there's going to be free parking, there's not free parking down there right now. And as we think about building a lakefront, parking is an important piece of that. However, to Drew's point earlier, we do want to encourage alternate modes of transportation, especially as we move through our downtown.
If I go ahead.
Free parking is never free. There's
Correct.
always
Someone
a
pay
cost
for
of
it.
parking somewhere. Somebody is bearing the cost of parking.
And that, sorry, I was gonna add, it is $8,000 per spot to build a parking spot. So if you build a parking lot, times that by 8,000 per spot. I just want to add that. I had another thought, but
I was gonna say, the thing that we are really focused on though is access. So whether you're, getting there by car, if there's you're asking about free parking, one of the nice things about the land bridge is it kind of opens up the entirety of downtown as a place to park and then get to the lakefront because it will be really fast. And so our street parking is often free, not always, but often free. We're also, a big component of the project is a new multimodal transit hub. And so we are thinking really intentionally about how do we make this new development really transit accessible. And then the project is also just kind of covered with bike trails, multi-use paths. We want to really incentivize people to get there lots of different ways, not just by car.
And really quickly, I will say, yes, I own a car, I use a car, but You know, when I take the bus to work, there's a $500,000 vehicle that picks me up right at my doorstep and takes me to work, and it's the best. So just a shout out to the RTA. They do really well in the city.
Well, I think that is a really good question to wrap us up because it talks about access, connectivity, multimodal transit. So we're gonna wrap up there, but thank you once again to Drew, Jessica, and Scott for joining us at the Happy Dog. So forums like this one are made possible thanks to generous support from individuals like you. You can learn more about how to become a guardian of free speech and make a donation today at cityclub.org. Today's forum is also part of the City Club in the Community series sponsored by Bank of America. The Happy Dog Takes On series will be off next month due to the new year, but be sure to drop on by on Wednesday, February 5th for more Happy Dog conversations just like this one. You can learn more about these forums and others at cityclub.org. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, members and friends of the City Club and those who joined us on the live stream. I'm Abby Marshall, and this forum is now adjourned.